recap some of my favorite books for 2020. I read 30 books, which is not as much as a lot of people out there. For me, it's a lot from like, I went from a kid who did not read at all. Like, I think I'm pretty sure I only read one book. It's about Vietnam in all of high school. um, but here I am evolving. My goal is to read at least 52 books this year in 2021. I do just want to note, it's entirely possible. Number one, it's not about finding more time. It's about learning to read correctly and efficiently. So we learn to read phonetically when we're kids, but then we never go back after that and then learn how to read for that improved level. I found that like reading would put me to sleep. It was putting me to sleep because I was reading too slow and I was bored. So I took a speed reading course with Jim Kwik. It's really reasonably priced. It was like 10 to 15 minutes a day for like, I don't know, it was like 3 weeks. Manageable. And it just was like life transforming. I can't say enough about it. You just learn so much in that course. And part of it is just practicing like a muscle, like trying to read faster than you really can. The comprehension doesn't matter. You're just doing that just to like work out like your eye muscles. But it's also just learning to be more efficient. So you kind of learn, like if you see a stop sign, you're no longer breaking down the word stop. You just recognize the word. And so when we read, a lot of it's just we like recognize the word. So you can actually group words together. So I just want to say this, it's not about finding more time. I have 3 kids, I homeschool, I run multiple businesses out of my home. I'm not finding more time. I'm just reading more efficiently. So I'm getting more in the time I have set aside. The other thing is I super highly recommend something like Whisper Sync with Audible, because you can move between the audiobook and the physical book. I'm reading a physical book right now. I really enjoy it. I just like I'm like I don't know if I'm going to reach my goal of reading 1 book this week. I'm just moving so slow, and I realized, well, I didn't buy the audio book version. I'm trying to think of what they call it, because there's an Audible book with Audible, but when you go to check out with your book in your Amazon cart, there's another name for it, audio something. And when you buy it that way, them together, the two talk to each other. So it will, like if I'm reading it in bed at night and then I get up in the morning and decide to go for a walk, I can listen to it. It will ask me, hey, do you want to leave off where you left off last night in the Kindle app? And then when I go to the Kindle app later, it'll be like, hey, you were here in the audiobook. Do you want to leave off there? And so you're not having to like re-find your spot in each. It will automatically move you. If you go in and just buy the book and then later you buy the audiobook, then it doesn't sync. I wish I could remember the name of it. It's still audible narration is what it's called. So you want to get the audible narration because that talks to the Kindle book. I just find that then makes it more efficient, because then if you do want to find like little nuggets of extra time, like cooking dinner, going for a walk or whatever, you can like sneak in the audiobook. So those are my tips. I have a handful of books that I loved. I'm gonna like list them not in order of like favorite, but just like my mind thinks sequentially of the order of the year that I read them. So the first book was Carol Dweck's Mindset. This was one of those years too where I just saw it everywhere. The book goes basically to talk about mindset, what it is, why it's so important. We have this like notion of what intelligence is, and a lot of times it's tied to easy. And this is something I've experienced in school, and I personally, working with kids in a school, I previously worked as a speech therapy assistant. Sometimes when super smart kids meet a challenge, the attitude just skyrockets because they're not used to being challenged. We equate intelligence with easy. So when you look at the data on kids who are accepted to like Mensa, the like Brainiac organization, and you go on to look like how many of them actually do something in the world, it's not those super intelligent kids, because they're so revered and put up on the pedestal for their results and that they get them so easy, that we all know life isn't easy and things are hard. They often aren't even allowed the room in the space to learn how to work through something hard. And so, it's just, they don't have the mindset of a learner. They have the mindset of, I'm an answerer, a quick answerer, if that makes sense. So she talks in the book about John McEnroe, how he was this gifted tennis player, and he went to get guitar lessons and he wasn't amazing, so he busted the guitar. Well, of course you're not amazing. You have to learn. Even though you were gifted at tennis, you still had to practice to become better. And when he didn't do well in his matches, he blamed it was the ball, it was the racket. It wasn't like it just happens, I needed to practice or whatever. She talks about business leaders that are that way. It just provides you with this different way of looking at things. She talks about a study I had read a few years ago about if you take two groups of kids and you give group A and B the same test, but group A, you reward them even just verbally on the results. You got 95%, you're amazing. You got 100%, you're amazing. Group B, on the other hand, you reward them on their effort. I noticed that you really took your time to answer that. I noticed you really thought them out. You don't mention what the results are. Then you come back and say, okay, group A, group B, I have this harder test. Do you want to take it? Group A, no, because you've set their brains up to receive that sensory information, that reward based on results. And so if they think, well, I'm not going to do as good because it's harder, they're not going to do it. Whereas group B, where it didn't matter about results, we're like, sure. I don't remember if she mentions this or I just randomly read it somewhere else, where they talk about writing. If you give group A and you say, okay, I want you to write a really, really good story. This is how much time you have. And then group B, okay, this is how much time you have. I want you to write as many stories as possible. What ends up happening is group A, their stories aren't great and they may not even finish it. Whereas group B, their stories may not start out great, but they've written a ton of work. And just by the fact that they've actually written, their stories improve. Whereas group A is so worried and stuck and is it good? Is it work? Is it good? Is it work? That they just never even cultivate writing. They just don't even practice. It's so much more. I actually want to reread that book this year. It's an amazing book. You start to see how we do that in school to kids. You see it in leadership. Where the next book I read was Limitless by Jim Kwik, another amazing, fantastic book. This book is on meta learning, so learning how to learn. He walks you through the science of the brain, all these tools that are out there. It just, as someone who is a home educator with my kids, I left public education because of what he writes about. I wouldn't say that his book caused me to leave. I known about his work. I've been a huge fan of Jim Kwik, but that information coupled with my experience and assistive technology and my son's experience in kindergarten is what had me hightail it out there. For example, long-term memory is an event mixed with emotion. That's what equals long-term memory. And we make most kids learn through rote repetition. And this is, I don't think homeschool is excluded from this. I see that a lot too. Just not that there isn't a place for some repetition, but if that's the only way you're teaching is through repetition, it's not the most efficient way. Let's just put it that way. And then in school, when it's you have a time limit, if it's a kid who just needs a few more days of repetition, they lose out because the timeline is the timeline. I can't say enough. And his story is amazing. He suffered a brain injury when he was really young and mega struggled in school. And if you ever see him, he'll recite 100 numbers forwards and backwards that he's memorized in a crowd. And he always talks about, I'm not doing this to impress you. I'm doing this to impress upon you what's possible. So it's amazing. Pick up that book, pick it up for your kids. His courses, he offers a speed reading course, which I've taken, changed my life, which I talked about. That's the course I took. He offers a thinking course that's new this year. I bought it. I think he had 2 courses on sale together and I bought them together. I haven't done them yet, but the thinking course, how to critically think. He talks about in that book too, how we're losing that ability, how with the internet, we just grab someone else's opinion and we're that's mine, but that's actually not great for our brain. Cause your brain's a muscle, you use it, you lose it. And then his other courses on memory. And I think he has a few other, but those are the ones that I own. And like I said, I've only got the speed reading one. I highly recommend the book. The courses dive even deeper. So like, you're going to go for it. Go for the course. The next book, I have to look at my notes because I read a lot of books. Oh, Gabby Bernstein. I like binged on her. So we RV back this summer, and I just pretty much listened to Gabby Bernstein the entire way home. There's just like something so comforting about her writing, about there being something there. I can't remember this professor, like super smart professor, talks about, what if you just believed that the universe is rooting you on? Like, it's not neutral, but it is always rooting you on. Like, what if you just let yourself believe that? What if you just let yourself, and maybe for you, I use the word universe because that's what he said. Maybe for you, it's God. Like, God is always there rooting you on. The universe, Mother Earth, whatever, insert your word, is always there rooting you on. Like, what if I think people say it, but sometimes I don't know if people like feel it, believe it. Like, it is always there rooting you on. Her writings are just an extension of that, in my opinion. They just give you this sense of like, I don't know, a soft place to land. And she reads her own books, and I love the sound of her voice. And I love because she's the one that wrote those words, and those words mean something. So when they come out of her mouth, there's just more of a power to it, and a feeling to it. So I read The Universe Has Your Back, Judgment Detox, and Super Attractor. And I really enjoyed Judgment Detox. I thought that was a great book. She said that people have a really hard time reading that book. I thought it was really fantastic. Really good book. Like, when someone POs you or you want to judge, the first thing is you stop and ask yourself, what is this triggering within me? It's beautiful. Next, I read The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel. I'm going to say Bessel van der Kolk. That book was, there's some books I wish were required reading for kids in school. I know that was one of them. It really teaches you how, he started his practice shortly after Vietnam, how trauma, and here's the thing, like, I think I might have had this in one of my like monthly recaps of books. We often think of like trauma as like a really life-altering, violent situation. That's big T, but there's little t, and we all experience little t. Sometimes I like to, instead of calling it trauma, I like to call it unresolved emotional issues or emotional baggage, whatever. Everyone has it. You have it because, like, if you're a 6-year-old whose mom breaks your favorite toy, as a 6-year-old, that's like, it's a big deal. She broke your toy. Your body remembers that. You as an adult may choose to forget it, or you may just don't remember it, and you may remember it, but have the perspective of, well, her mom had died and she wasn't in her right mind, and that's not who she is, right? So it doesn't have to be this really like awful violent situation, or some kid made fun of you in school. When we don't resolve those, they get stuck in our body. And he talks about common autoimmune disorders he sees from people who've suffered trauma, how they've cleared up once they've actually dealt with the trauma, all sorts of things. How people go into fight or flight, like especially women will be with a partner and the partner will touch her in a certain way and it just sends her off the end. And next thing you know, she's like, comes to it and he's running out, and she's not really understanding what happened, because it's like this survival instinct just took over the body. We really, and I'm going to talk about this in my last book, kind of like have not in science and in life, like connected, there's that mind, body, soul, like we've really like, science is like here down. We've really like have not done a great job of connecting the emotional part to what happens to our bodies physically. Stomach problems, I mean, we all know, like, right, you get butterflies in your stomach, like that's the same thing. A lot of people can have chronic stomach issues from undealt with emotions. And he also talks about how historically People use chants and dance as a way to resolve it communally and individually, and how the coming together for those things are very healing. It's just like an expression. He does a great, there's like not a boring moment in that book. And that book does get some of the stories are really hard to read because of course he goes for like the really big juicy stories that are hard. But you have to remember it's like a spectrum. The stories, especially because my dad was a Vietnam vet, I was so glad I read them because we just don't realize what other people are going through. We see someone who's like a jerk to his son and not realizing, well, in Vietnam, he ended up killing someone who was his son's age, or he was his son's age when he killed someone in Vietnam, and that's just a trigger. It's like helps you to get like judgment detox, some compassion for other people, or provide some insight into your own life why you have the reactions you have. But he does a great job of detailing, hey, these are the things we could do. Acting, like he talked about how with like vets coming from Afghanistan, they used acting to help work some of that stuff out. Tapping, EMDR. They do this other kind of like, it's kind of like an acting, but not like, he does talk about where you simply put on a play, you work through emotions, but he talks about this other thing, I don't remember what it's called, where you have a group of people and like, we're going to work on Tony's, the people in his life that have caused this emotional, unresolved emotional issues. And everyone, like there'll be like one person, let's say his mom and dad are the problem. Someone plays mom, someone plays dad, but then two other people play his ideal mom and his ideal dad. And he can walk through forgiveness for each of them, but then also meet ideal mom and ideal dad. And he talks about how that provides an immense amount of healing. There's just a lot of really amazing resources out there you don't hear talked about very often, and how they work and why they work. So yeah, it was really enlightening. And plus two, it's like, you can go to someone who has EMDR, but if they don't understand why it's being used and aren't proficient at it, you might not find it work. So don't give up. But it's an amazing book. And I think it provides a lot of perspective as to generational trauma, like why is someone who is abused abuses. Maybe it's not even abuse. Maybe like, again, someone has a baby and then they experience a death in their family and they have a hard time connecting with the baby. That does have effects later on, detachment issues. It's really, knowledge is power. So the next book I read, so many like self-help books. The next one I read is not. It was A Woman of No Importance. It's a true story of Virginia Hall. This is one of my favorite books I've ever read. I feel like when I read this story, like there was some sort of divine guidance in her life because she should not have made it through. So Virginia Hall wanted to be a diplomat. Of course, it's the 20s. Women don't get to be diplomats. So she ends up working as like a secretary, and everyone who meets her just loves her. And they recommend her to actually take a higher position, but she just keeps meeting the red tape. She ends up like in Turkey and ends up in an accident where she ends up shooting her own leg. And so she loses like one of her legs from just, I think, below the knee down. So she has a prosthetic leg. And she ends up in France. France, she loves. She finds as a female, she went to France in college, like she was allowed to be free. It wasn't like you need to marry this guy and have money. You need to marry a guy who has money. It doesn't matter if he's a good guy. It was just a sense of freedom it gave her. And so she really had grown to love France as a kid, or as a budding young woman. So World War II starts breaking out. The U.S. isn't really involved. So she goes to work for SEO, which is British intelligence. It's not MI6. And basically she goes in to get information, to network, to create French resistance. And it is dicey. They are constantly being caught. They're constantly being tortured. It is, it just is like, you read it and you're just like, we really don't understand what pain is. We don't. It's like I said, it's like something guides her, like something tells her to go into this bakery before she goes into that place. And the person at the bakery is like, oh yeah, just stay away from that building. The Gestapo just went in there. Or she goes into this and walks around. And while she's doing that, something just tells her to just take that moment to walk around this other building before going to that one. The Gestapo's there. One time so the Gestapo was in France, and France was split into two areas. And there was the Vichy police who worked with the Gestapo and were just as brutal, if not more brutal, trying to prove like to the Germans, like, you know, we are just like you. And what would happen is they would actually take French citizens. They weren't like looking for a specific labeled, but they would just grab French citizens off the street and ship them for labor in Germany. So every now and then there would be roundups, like they would just go into restaurants and cafes and round people up. Well, she got caught in one of those, but the person she was with just so happened to know one of those officers. Now, there were officers in the Vichy police who did not agree with it and worked to help people. It'd be really interesting to see more stories about that. I'll have to research that. So she lucked out, and that officer somehow was able to let them get out a back window and escape. It's like there was all these instances where she shouldn't have made it through, and she did. She was like one of the most wanted people by the Germans. She caused that much devastation for them. And here they couldn't find her. The woman with the funny walk who had a peg leg just owned it. She did what she needed to do out of the love for her country. Well, she was an American, a love for France, which is even more astounding. It wasn't even like her birth country. It was an amazing book. I just highly recommend it. I wish we talked more about people like her. And then when you look at the U.S. government, and they talk a little bit at the end about, she does end up working for the Americans so she can go back in. And they do talk a little bit at the end about the formation of the CIA, because the CIA wasn't around during World War II, but it was born out of it. And how instead of taking the field agents from World War II and first of all, the Americans went in towards the end of the war and they sucked. And it's just one of those things you have to learn. Like the British had to learn, like, you know, they have all these like innate things, like carrying their, folding their jackets over their arms and umbrellas. The way they walked and talked was not how French did. So when they would drop in, it was easy for the Gestapo to figure out that was a British agent because of these small quirky things about the way they dressed or carried themselves or things they had. And the Americans just were sloppy. We just didn't know. So she does go to work for the CIA, but the CIA, instead of recruiting those agents who were there, recruit people out of like Ivy League schools. Come on, we all know how that works. Like someone can be super smart on paper, but like in real world street smarts. And so we wonder, like, I look at that and think like, I had read Talking to Strangers last 2019, and he was talking about this big coup. The Queen of Cuba went on for like 10 years. She was trading secrets to Cuba, and Cuba just made the United States look like idiots a whole bunch of times. Then you like understand why, because we never like took people that were master field agents. We just we created the CIA from all these men who were coming out of Ivy League colleges that didn't really have field experience. Well, that was a rant, but it just like, again, gives you perspective. The next book is Tiny Habits by Dr. BJ Fogg. This is the perfect time of year to talk about this book. It should be like a video on its own. How many times do people tell you you need 21 days to make a habit? That's not true. You don't. And Dr. BJ Fogg does such a masterful job of explaining how it works, and it just totally clicked in my brain. So he basically says behavior, he's like a little chart. Behavior equals MAP. Just remember that, MAP. Motivation, ability, and prompt. So he has like this chart and this like curve. If this is motivation, this is ability. Wrestling with a bear. Low motivation, low ability. So it would be below the curve, unlikely to occur. Wrestling with a bear when your baby's with you. You may not have a strong ability, but your motivation is so high, it's going to put you over the curve and make that more likely to happen. I know it's a crazy example, but that just comes to mind. Or maybe it's like dancing. You don't have a high motivation, you don't have high ability, not going to happen. But you're at a wedding, and even though you don't have a strong ability, you have a lot of motivation. So it's all about these pieces: motivation, ability, and prompts that will get you to do a behavior. It's not like you can't stick with something for 21 days. You just have to understand how the brain works. And he also talks a lot about, it's called tiny steps because you take tiny steps. You want to add working out? Well, don't just go straight to working out. Maybe just add, I mean, you're going to have to figure out the level for you. Maybe just add putting on your shoes. Okay, I get up, I brush my teeth, get some water, and put on my shoes. And then after you get used to that and that just becomes second nature, right? Getting your water becomes your prompt. Your tiny step is putting on your shoes. And then maybe the next step is, okay, get up, drink water. That prompts me to put on my shoes. I've already got that down. Now putting on my shoes becomes the prompt to walk into wherever you're going to work out. And then you just add steps, or maybe it's just walk out to the porch if it's like you're just going to add on a walk. And then maybe from the porch it goes to walking to the mailbox and check your mail. Whatever. It just, he does such a good job of like showing you how to break down stuff. And he has all these processes. I shouldn't say he has all these processes. Using the behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt, he takes you through an exercise where you can look at, okay, what behaviors do you want to add? Well, what's the motivation? What's your ability? What's your prompt? And you can kind of look in there like, okay, what is this really like? Am I just adding this because I feel the pressure to? Do I need to make it more specific? Okay, well, what is my motivation? What is my ability? And where can I find the prompt? Where can I add this in my day? You're just a little bit more thoughtful than just like, I'm going to work out. It is an amazing tool. And he does talk about like how to stop habits, because again, that equation goes into making habits. So it just was a really good book. And I like it because people beat themselves up about not being able to follow through with goals. But the thing is, our brains work a certain way. And if you don't know how the brain works, how do you make decisions to change, right? Like it all starts with our brain. And he does a great job with walking through how our behaviors actually work. That's another book I'd love to reread. Okay, last book. My last book was my favorite book of the year, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. This book just was life-changing. The first part of the book, I just so enjoyed. It just reminded me of so much of some of the other books I read and learning about the brain. And he talks about at some point, with like Galileo and some of those people we look up to, they determined, right, the world is governed by these set of rules, and that's science. But then when it comes to the human brain, there's no rules governing that. So that's left to God and the church. And science has largely, in my opinion, operated that way. We very much have separated the two. And so he talks about that. He talks about the science of meditation. Thoughts emit frequencies. They can measure them. It's not just this frou-frou book on meditation. It is truly a book that goes through a lot of science of breaking the habit of being yourself, how the things you do and say become very subconscious. So how do you change the subconscious? Because you can't do it consciously. So he goes in and kind of teaches you how to use meditation to relax the body, because a lot of times our bodies hijack our brain, which is funny because we are very disconnected from our bodies. But your body gets used to running a certain chemical cocktail, if you will. Like if you've lived in a stressful environment for most of your life, your body's used to those stress hormones. And if you say, okay, I'm going to live life differently and I'm going to be happy, I'm going to read this stuff, your body's going to be like, wait, we don't have all these hormones. Like, make them. I experienced this in my life. My first year of ever meditating, I remember it was my first Christmas not having to work retail. And I was working at a school, so I was off, and I felt my body like having anxiety. And then I felt my brain searching for reasons to be anxious. And that's kind of what he's talking about. You don't even realize that your body now is in control and telling your brain, like, we need stress hormones. We're not stressed, because it likes familiar. Like it's a survival thing for us. Way back when we were in smaller tribes, we learned to survive based off of predictability. So even if something's new and even if it's safe, our body, that instinctual human part still like doesn't know that. And especially, again, if you've lived in a stressful environment your whole life, not being in a stressful environment is very unfamiliar and can trigger your body to like try and tell your brain, like, we're not making these things. Why aren't we? We need them. So anyways, that's it. Those are my top books for 2020. And yeah, happy reading for 2021. If you like these videos, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll make monthly videos on the books that I read. I may do that anyways, just because I love books and love talking about books. But leave down below what you've read, what were your favorite books, and please like and subscribe. See you next video. Bye.